my guest today is Paul Thompson, and let's get to know Paul a little bit more today. So, who is Paul? Paul has had 25 years funding business owners and property investors and developers and people like that. He is the founder and owner of Acorn Finance. He served 5 years on the board of the National Association of Commercial Finance Brokers and won seven times. He won Best UK Broker Awards. So that was Acorn Finance. But Paul himself studied international relations at uni, and before that, he trained as a Sea King helicopter pilot for the Royal Navy. And that is probably why his podcast is called Flying High. But, Paul, on that note, welcome to Maximising Property Values. And before we go into your activities, let's get to know you just a little bit better. And I know that we've been talking a little bit about your move to Spain. So for people who don't know, Paul has recently emigrated to Spain within the last week or so. So that's really interesting, and I'm a nosy person naturally. So, but here are your two questions. One, what was it that made you, stroke, encouraged you, stroke, and to actually emigrate? So, what was it that made you emigrate? And then once you answer that, I'll come on to the second one.
Yeah, don't ask me two questions at once because I'll forget one of them before I've got to answering them both. So, what made us emigrate? We've been talking about it for a long time. My wife and I, we've been married 10 years this year, and I honestly think it's been on the cards for pretty much 10 years or more, probably, that we would end up somewhere else. We both enjoy seasons and cold winters, hot summers. So going somewhere where the weather's a bit different to the UK is definitely an advantage. And just a change of lifestyle, really, a different pace of life. I've been, as you say, I've been doing this for 25 years, and a lot of that I was working in partnership with my father. He retired in 2016 and then unfortunately died last year. But he was very old school in wanting to have the office, the staff around him, that sort of thing. When he retired, the carrying on that way just seemed a bit pointless. And at that point, I hadn't got a business that I was growing, and I wish I'd learnt a lot more about growing a business before he retired rather than after. So we'd kept the business deliberately small. It was kind of his choice rather than mine. 2 advisors running the business and just maintaining that. We were always very good at what we did. We were always very responsive to clients, that sort of thing. But he never wanted to grow the business into what it could be. But in doing that, we got a really good reputation. When he retired, I realised that actually most of what we do is being on the phone to clients. It's not seeing people face to face. The internet meant at that point you could see people face to face through Zoom, as everybody does now, through Skype, anything. And that was back in sort of 2016, 17. And it made me realise that actually paying for an office space that was redundant really was pointless. So I moved the business into my home office. So I was a bit ahead of the time then. I didn't know it at the time, but that was a good move. And then it makes you realise that actually you can run this business from anywhere in the world. So where I had been thinking I'd have to retire and move over to another country and then set a business up locally, actually I can stay running Acorn. I can sit here in the sun I could have a sangria or a beer in my hand if I wanted, but I've actually got a glass of water because I've got a busy afternoon. Um, and we can enjoy life and we can do what we want. So we're out here. We're not retiring. I'll continue to work full time at Acorn, although I've got franchisees now who I'm trying to build more of the business through them rather than through me advising every client. But we'll also start a business over here. It might be property business, might be hospitality, uh, it might be sort of serviced accommodation. It might actually be farming, and we've seen a lemon farm that we quite like the idea of. So we're looking into all these different avenues to see what really tickles our fancy. But I'm also looking to start doing some funding over here as well. So I've reached out to a few local financial advisors to say, well, we've got the access to lenders who want to lend in Spain. So I'm just starting to look into the regulatory requirements over here. I don't think I've answered your question, have I? Have I answered the question?
No, 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 you have. You have. 10 years in the
I'm just
making. 10.
waffling. Yeah,
No,
but
but
I was going to say, we've looked at lots of different countries. We've been watching, all the TV programs, the Escape to the Chateau and Escape to the New Life in the Sun, all these things. But we love the way of life in Spain. We love the Spanish attitude to life, the laid back, enjoy life, take long lunches, enjoy the day, and don't and live. What do they say? Work to live, don't live to work. So, yeah, going to get as close to that as we possibly can while still running an UK business and people expecting me to be on call 24/7. So, yeah.
wow. Well, do you know what? I clearly wish you all the very, very best with that. And I hope it works out. And yeah, I can't wait till you've got your place and you invite us all over to come and have a look. Right. Okay. Great stuff. So you've got lovely weather at the moment and we don't, but ours is going to improve as well. So I'm going to bear that in mind and not feel too jealous.
We did when we arrived. We did have a couple of days of quite cold and rain. Um, whenever that was, last week sometime. So it's not all plain sailing, but
Oh.
it's not too bad.
Right. Okay. Now, the other thing that I haven't mentioned is that you also you featured on TV where you were helping the BBC to look at people who brokers who were badly behaved. So, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, I'm trying to remember when that was. I'm going to go very vague and say it was the early part of this century, which makes me sound absolutely ancient when you say things like that. I'd been working with a journalist from the Publican. This is it's a business related rather than property, but unfortunately, people in the license trade are not always the most savvy business people. Some of them are, but it's one of those businesses that people get into almost by accident, like some landlords, some property landlords do, and they grow a business, but they're not always the most savvy. So this particular company based down in Bournemouth, I think, were calling up people saying, "Well, we can arrange a mortgage for you or against your property," and they were really preying on pubs, takeaways, and those sort of small businesses. We can arrange a mortgage or we can do your lending, and it's going to cost you this, which was half what the high street banks were paying. All you need to do is give us £1,000 or £2,000 up front, and we'll get it sorted. And they were quite plausible, and people were paying them £1,000 or £2,000. So the BBC asked me to get involved because I'd been dealing with the Publican newspaper who started the investigation off, and then the BBC had picked it up. So we did some of these covert or whatever telephone recordings and that sort of thing, and I was able to sit there and said, well, that's what they're saying that's incorrect. That's incorrect. They should be asking these sorts of questions for them to be able to give the information that they're giving, which all of it was wrong. And basically, it was, they'll take that money up front. And then if you try to get hold of them a few weeks later when your loan hasn't arrived, the phones ring out, that you couldn't get hold of them, they don't answer your emails, and that sort of thing. So it was that, thing that you used to do on Watchdog, they still do on Watchdog, but it was Inside Out, the programme. And it was just that consumer rights thing of, it's an unregulated business, so people can say and do what they want, but fraud is still fraud. And they got shut down, and the director of that company was banned as a director. But they did pop up again with him working as an advisor, and I think his son-in-law or daughter-in-law or something as the directors of the company. They're not around anymore, to the best of my knowledge. But these things do pop up, and they, as we've seen with that property trainer, I can't think of his name, who went bankrupt a few weeks ago. It happens in every sector, and without really, really tight regulation, which hits us all too hard and ends up costing the consumer more money, there's little we can do about it. You just have to do your own due diligence, and you have to treat it like a business. So, especially in property, there, as we said earlier, there's a lot of accidental landlords, and they'll go to the cheapest possible. Sometimes they will go to the cheapest possible source of funding or source of advice, be it funding, legal, whatever it may be. And that's not always going to be the best answer. Sometimes it's worth paying for experience and paying for somebody who really knows what they're doing.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Because you've probably answered my second question then, because the second question was, or was going to be, what is the worst broker bad behaviour that you've seen? So I'm assuming it's this guy from Bournemouth, or have you seen something
It's
even worse?
it's abs- it's absolutely that. That's called advance fee fraud. I could. I'm not sure if I can say the other one. Yeah, I probably can. I do know of another one who used to had a pet accountant who used to have accounts written to get commercial mortgages at the deals that they wanted. Most lenders wouldn't deal with him because everybody knew what he was doing, but a few lenders just turned a blind eye to that. So personally, I think that's very bad. He got clients what they wanted, but got it not by fair means. Not something that I would entertain. He actually ended up going to prison for about 7 years for money laundering. So he's no longer a broker either. He was up north. That's pretty bad. But in the main, those sort of things aren't going on. The main bad behaviour, as opposed to the worst bad behaviour, is just over promising and under delivering. It's saying that we can do these deals without really talking to a customer, and customers push you into that. They say, I want to buy to let, and I want you 75%. So you say, well, yeah, we can do that from certain rates, but I need to know more information before I start telling you what you're going to get. So people are pushing you for the best rate, and then they're comparing you to another broker who says they can do much better. And that's purely because they're not giving you enough information. And I like to say what I can do, not what I hope I can do. And I know that some brokers would say what they hope they can do rather than what they know they can do. And it's just that different approach. We probably lose business based on that. And I don't mind that, because that sort of business I can probably do without. Yes, by stretching the truth a little bit, you could probably grow your business much faster. But I don't want to be in that business. That's not how I work.
Wow, excellent. Do you know, and you're absolutely right there. Because that also, it actually reminds me of an estate agent, um, who would, if you're selling, they'll come and say, yes, we can get this for you. And do you know what? This particular estate agent, and everyone said, within a week, literally not even a week, 3 days, they'd ring you up and say, "Ooh, we think that price is a bit too high. Let's reduce it downwards." And they won't be talking 1,000 or 2,000. It'll be like, 30,000, 50,000.
Yeah,
And they never expected to sell at the price that, they would have told the seller they could get. They just wanted that property on their books.
yeah, and it's a really hard position if you're selling a property, especially for non-investors or for small investors. You're not selling a property every day. It's not a regular occurrence. So you're reliant on these experts to give you an honest opinion. We sold our York house last year, um, and we actually ended up going with the agent that gave us the highest valuation because we found them credible, um, and they got way more than we expected, and we'd done all the research on Rightmove and Zoopla, etc. So we had an idea of what we thought it was worth. They got us, a good amount more than we were expecting, which is good. Not as much as they suggested it might go for, but fair enough. But it was still more than some of the other agents had suggested, as a marketing price. So it is a difficult one, and you've got to get different opinions, and then you've got to go with your gut about who you trust, really, about who you feel most comfortable working with, and it shouldn't always be based on price. It should be based on who you want to work with.
Definitely. So, Paul, it was okay for you to be on the balcony, but
I've
there's
just
a
moved.
oh, you've just moved. Okay, because there
I've
was
just
a
moved
bit of, yeah.
inside.
Okay,
Yeah,
great stuff. Thank you. Right. Okay. So you actually you love the more complex funding situations, um, because you say, they make you think, they make you bring all of your experience to bear. You Tell us about, these complex situations, because there might be somebody in the audience or somebody who will be listening to this on the podcast who might think, oh, do you know what, I've got this hopeless situation, I can't actually fund this deal, um, because it just seems impossible. But maybe they need to come to somebody like you who might be able to unravel it for them and put it all back together. So can you tell us about these complex situations that actually make your heart beat faster?
yeah. I've been racking my brains trying to think about what to talk about, and we've got a client at the moment that just in the throes of finishing a development case. So they bought a hotel which we funded. Um, I think in about 2008, something like 2007, 2008. Bought this hotel in Derbyshire. Nice little hotel, nice business, um, and they've run it since then. Uh, they're getting a little bit older, looking for their exit, and the options for selling it as a hotel and getting a good return on it weren't looking brilliant. And this is going back sort of pre-COVID, so 2018, 19. So they'd marketed it as a hotel. They'd had an offer from a property developer, subject to planning. Oh no, it wasn't subject to planning. It was just an offer, which they accepted. Um, so they went through the throes of closing their business down, getting rid of all their inventory, that sort of thing. Uh, they exchanged contracts on it, and the completion never happened. The planning permission didn't come through, but it wasn't a deal that was subject to planning. So the buyer ended up in default of the contract. They phoned me and said, "What can I do? What can I do?" They've still got a mortgage on the hotel. They thought it was all going to be paid off. They'd spoken to the lender, and it was the mortgage that I had arranged. They'd spoken to the lender, and they'd got, from closing the hotel, they'd got sort of a 6-month window where they would just add the interest back onto the loan and give them that time to sell, which was fine. They were approaching the end of that 6 months, and the buyer was showing no indications that he was actually going to buy the place. So they were getting quite panicky. And I said, well, the options are you either borrow a load of money to reopen the hotel and buy new inventory, which we can do. They didn't really want to do that because they knew that they wanted to sell the hotel, and the best sale was going to be through a developer. Or you remarket as a development opportunity, but they've turned down the planning at the moment, so it doesn't look great. Or we look at why the planning's been turned down and reframe it in that angle. So they got planning experts involved, realised that basically the developer was trying to cram too many apartments into the building, and if they took one apartment away, it would reduce a flooding risk because they'd required the basement to be used, and there was just this issue of runoff water filling the basement up. If they got rid of that, the negatives would go away, and the planning would most likely be approved. They did, and it was. So we were able to, firstly, going back 2 steps, we bridged the refinance of the mortgage so that they were on a bridging loan. They would therefore not have payments to make during a year, which would give them to get the planning sorted, which took about 8 months, so we weren't far off the mark. We then refinanced that onto a development loan, which gave them another year following to do the build. We're about, where are we? 7 months into that, and the properties are being marketed now. The show apartment has been completed and looks amazing. And they've got CGI visions, or whatever you call them, images of all the other apartments, and the conversion is looking absolutely fantastic. So we were able to turn that from a real problem case where they were very, very worried that they were going to be repossessed, to a development, and it's a first-time development. They've bought houses that they've refurbished before, but nothing on the scale of a 12-bedroom hotel, I think it was. So, they've gained a huge amount in experience, and they're now talking to me about the next opportunity, which is for them to buy. They haven't found it yet, but they want to buy another hotel to convert to apartments because they can see the value in it, and they're looking at nice, smaller properties like the one that they've got. So they're building 8 apartments in this, and from a 12-bedroom hotel. So they're looking at similar opportunities to go off and do again. So yeah, that got me going. It stretched us in terms of getting lenders to do the work. We had a lender lined up for the development. That lender ran out of money. Unfortunately, it was a crowdfunded lender, and I know there's a lot of crowdfunding lenders, and most of them are excellent. Unfortunately, this one I will never touch again. They just didn't understand the deal when they said they did. They didn't have the funding background that they needed, and they came up short. So we had to move to a second development lender, which obviously cost the customer quite a lot of money. We recouped a lot of that from the first lender, but not all of it. But it was worth it in the end. And the lender that we're with now will see them through to the end, and the sales are starting to come in already. So it's good. But yeah, there were a lot of there were phone calls on holiday. There were after work calls to the client to keep the thing moving, put their mind at rest, and that sort of thing. So yeah, definitely, it's worth it. You put the work in, and you get happy clients, and a lot of those clients, this is case in point. I've known these clients for 15 years, and they come back and come back again and come back again. So, well, must be doing something right, hopefully.
Definitely. Paul, you mentioned something there which I think is actually quite important to people in property. They didn't have the experience to do what they were proposing to do, but you were still able to get them the funding. Can you just maybe like talk to people about that? Because lots of people, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? And not everyone wants to kind of like cozy up with somebody else in joint venture, or get themselves like a teacher or a mentor. But how can you help people if they haven't got the requisite experience, but they're really keen to actually do something with whatever it is that they're looking at?
Well, in this case, and this is what we'd normally do, we make sure that there's a good team around them. Somebody put something on Facebook the other day that the pilot of an aeroplane doesn't serve the drinks. In fact, I did used to serve the drinks and sometimes, but that was quite a small aeroplane, so I could just hand something over. But yeah, you work as part of a team. Nobody expects the manager of Liverpool to be on the pitch running around with the team. He's done that in the past, I'm sure. I don't know a lot about football, but it is a team. It's everybody's part of a team. So as long as the customer had the right team around him and was getting the right advice, the lender's comfortable that the work's being done to the right standard. He's there. His full-time job was running a hotel, so he's there full time running the development, putting orders in, making sure things are being done right. But when something needs to be checked off as being safe or compliant with building regs or whatever it may be, he has the right people to do that, be it an architect or an electrician or the builder. So it's about making sure that that team is experienced and robust enough to keep him on track and tell him if he's doing something wrong. So we've got a main contractor who is experienced and responsible, has a proper team around them. They're not just getting in subcontractors that they don't know. We've got an architect who's drawn up the plans, he's involved in regular checks, and then we've got the members of the team. They've got obviously building control around and about anyway, so we don't want to upset them, which we haven't. And you've got inspections from the what's it called, the warranty provider. So they're inspecting work as well to make sure that everything's being done correctly. So with all of those people keeping an eye on what's going on, we know that the builder isn't going to shortcut something and mess things up. And the client's gaining experience all the time. So with his next one, he's brought this one in. Touch wood, he'll bring it in within budget. We're on target at the moment, and the sales will go. The sales projections are way in excess of what the valuer had said in 2019, because that's how the market's gone. The apartments look way better than anybody really could have predicted. So the sales will go well. That will go well on his CV. And for his next deal, we'll go to a different lender. We'll get him probably slightly more money than in this case, and he'll pay slightly less for it. But you start at a position of where you are with your experience, and you have to go to a lender that accepts that, which means that there's slightly more risk in the deal to the lender. So you pay a little bit more for that, but you still pay, you still make a much better profit than selling that site onto a third party who, in this case, didn't happen. But you know, the profit would have been way, way less, although they'd had that money 2 years ago. So it's horses for courses, really.
And also, he would have had the 10% that his buyer um, would have lost on not completing on the deal. So I think he's been laughing all the way to the bank. Lucky him.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and that helped. But I mean, lawyers did, I think, took a portion of that off him as well in retrieving, keeping it. And it did cause various legal problems later on for us to prove to lenders that that buyer, because he owned the plans, didn't have any sort of rights to the property. So it did cause us a few problems later, but nothing insurmountable, and just sort of scratching head moments to say, well, if this guy didn't complete on the project, on the purchase, he has no rights whatsoever. But we had to get quite a lot of legal advice around that for something that seemed to me to be common sense to actually be written down by a solicitor to say, yeah, that it does make sense and we're right. I don't know if you.
okay. Um, yeah, sometimes, the things that seem the most like logical, you have to jump through hoops to actually get other people to see it the way that you do. So, and that, yeah, that can be quite frustrating. Oof. Okay. Well, good for your client. And he must now be looking at that aborted purchase as a blessing in disguise. Because not only is he making more money, but he's also pivoting to do this himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's quite enjoyed it, really. I don't think he thought he would at the beginning, because he's done houses, and I think when you do a house up, you end up doing quite a lot of work yourself. And I think when you're in your mid late 50s, whatever, I'm not sure what he is, you don't relish all that work, and you don't want to start bashing walls down and that sort of thing. So I don't think he was really looking forward to it, but I think he's got his teeth into it and enjoyed it. Well, he must have enjoyed it to a certain extent because he's planning on doing it again.
Excellent. So that's one example. Can you share another one before we finish? Because it's it's good for people to kind of like be able to see the different kind of scenarios, the different kind of challenges, and how they might be resolved. Because ultimately that's what everyone wants, a happy ending. So are you able to share
Ooh,
with us another case study?
yeah, I haven't got something prepared really, so I'm going to have to rack my brains a little bit. I mean, we've done over 25 years. You do all sorts. You come across all sorts of different scenarios, um, and a lot of it is around people being told one thing which isn't true, um, and just needing to be pointed in the right direction as to what they can do rather than somebody just telling them what they can't do. Um, so, I've had working a lot with small business owners, you come across people who don't own their own property, so people who are in leasehold pubs. They might have a very successful business but don't own any property. And traditional, in inverted commas, knowledge says that if you don't own a property, you can't buy a buy to let because the lender will see it as a backdoor residential. And that's rubbish. I don't know who said that, but it's not true. Um, if you've got somebody who's got a legitimate reason for not owning a house, and the legitimate reason may not be that they live in their business, it may be that they live abroad, it may be that they live in London, they work in London, they can't afford to get on on the property ladder in London, but would like a property in Manchester that they can invest in so that they can start building a portfolio. Some brokers and some lenders will say, no, that's not possible. But it is possible. You just have to take the time to understand the client and the details and go to a lender who will accept that. And there are lenders that will accept. So any of those scenarios and more. So yeah, we've done that. We've worked with people who are non-property owners. At the moment we've got a case going through with one of my colleagues that I've sourced the funding for them. The client is a Hong Kong national, doesn't own any property out there because, similar to London, Hong Kong prices are just astronomical for anything decent. She's investing in the UK. She's got a Hong Kong passport, which allows you to buy property in the UK with no issues. So she's investing in the UK, and we've sourced funding for that as a first-time buyer, and that's absolutely fine. It's not the easiest. It's what we were saying earlier on. It's just something you get that understanding of the customer. You take the time to work out what they're doing, and you go to lenders based on that. And I think the traditional mortgage brokers rely on software packages like I can't think what they call Mortgage Brain and 27 Tech or something like that. I don't use them. I sometimes look at the magazines like Business Money Facts, which gives you a really good sort of overview, and then I rely on my own knowledge of of who to call. And sometimes you call somebody and say, "Oh no, we're out of that market now. Have you tried these people?" Sometimes, with your first two or three calls, you'll get to the ideal lender for the deal. So as I've built the franchise model, I've had to try to distill that knowledge. So we've got a huge spreadsheet with every lender that I know of, even the ones we don't deal with, on it. Fortunately, we're ostensibly we're whole of market, but we have some lenders that we choose not to deal with. So there's not very many of them. They're just the ones that upset us or upset our clients. So as of today, we've got 376 lenders because I've just taken a new one on this morning. I need to add to my list. So 376 different lenders covering the whole of the market. So it could be buy-to-let lenders, development lenders, refurbs, but also holiday let specialists, equity release, second charges, commercial mortgages, business lending, factoring or discounting, all those different sectors, because it all comes into what we do as brokers, and finding the right deal for somebody. So I've got a client at the moment. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to help them. They've got a property in Spain about a couple of hours from where I'm sitting, but it's on a very low mortgage. They don't want to touch that because they want to develop it out in the next year or two, and they want to start building a portfolio in the UK. They've got a UK business, but it's only been going 6 months and it hasn't really made any money yet. So I'm struggling to raise any funding in the UK for a deposit for the first buy to let in the UK, and they won't let me touch their property in Spain. So at the moment, I've got answers, but they're not willing to bend a little bit for me, and it makes it impossible. So does that give you a bit of a flavour?
Oh, it does. So it's a question of give and take, isn't it? So there may well be solutions to the complex scenarios, but only if people are prepared to actually, do the work and move and bend and, just kind of like, meet the other person halfway, I guess.
That's right. And people look at funding, and like those examples, you might have to pay more for something because it's very specialist. and you know you look at the papers, you look at the Telegraph or whatever, Best Buys, and you're seeing buy-to-let mortgages from Leeds or somebody at 1.5% or 2%. You're thinking, right, I want a bit of that because I can buy a house, let it out, and make a huge profit. And then they phone me, and I say, well, you're going to have to pay 4% because you're not a homeowner, or you're not this, you're not that. You've got, you haven't been in your job for very long, or whatever it may be. There's always foibles, and yes, you might be able to get that 1 or 2% rate. They're really low rates. Please don't quote me on these rates; these are just pulled out of the sky. But you might get those rates. But if there's something that makes it a little bit more difficult, then you're probably not going to get them. But you can still do the deal. So as long as the deal can be done and you can get that property, you're probably only going to be paying those rates for a short amount of time. And it might be that it's a 5-year fix, so you're going to pay it for 5 years. But after that, you should be able to move on to lower rates because you're an experienced landlord, you've got one or more properties under your belt, your credit's improved, whatever it may be that was stopping us in the first place has gone away by then. It might be 2 years or it might be 5 years, depending on how painful the rate is. But you do it, you get rid of that rate, and then you're into lower rates and happy days. So you've got to take a longer view. You've got to consider what's called a blended rate. So if you're paying a bridging rate to get a property that you're going to refurb and then let out, don't think, oh my gosh, I'm buying this property and it's costing me 9 or 10% a year. Think about the fact that, oh, I'm buying this property for 150 grand. When I've done a bit of work and turned it around, it's going to be worth 250 grand. And then I'm going to have it on a mortgage at this rate, at say, I don't know, 3.5 or something. So over 5 years, although the first 6 months has cost me 10% a year, so 5% for the 6 months, over the 5 years, averaging that rate out and realizing that you can actually take all that money out that you put in, the deal makes a lot more sense. And it's looking at those parts of the equation and thinking, well, yeah, there's an initial high risk, high rate situation because we're doing all this work. As you were always telling people, you're getting that property back to brick. Well, as soon as you start raising a chisel or a sledgehammer or a pneumatic drill in that property, the value drops significantly. It stops being a house that somebody could live in and starts being a building site. So until you've finished work and increased the property value, there's a massive risk. So a lender is going to look at that and price it accordingly. Because if you wander off site, they've got to sell the site to somebody else. And if it's in an unlivable, uninhabitable state with no kitchen, no bathroom, maybe no plaster on the walls, and wiring hanging out everywhere, there's a limited market for that. They can only sell it to developers. So there's that give and take. But if you can get a property for 150 and then it's worth 250 by the time you finish work on it and there's some profit in it, then it's worth paying a little bit more for the money.
Do you know what, Paul? I'm not a figures person, so I might sound quite dumb, but lenders just want it every which way in their favour, don't they? Now, them sort of like loading the interest because, there's a risk if somebody doesn't, have that much experience, blah, 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 and all of that, or they're going to be refurbing it. I completely get that. But what I don't get is why they need to double down. So they'll have a deposit, which usually is at least 25%. Then they want to load the interest rates. Then they want personal guarantees. Then they want this. Then they want that. For goodness sakes. How much
Yeah.
do they really want?
Um, they want as much as they can get. They want to secure their position as far as they can. But the more you're putting in, the easier the deal becomes, and the easier the deal becomes, the less it costs. So if you've got the ability to put a good PG in, if you've got another property that you could offer as additional security that isn't being worked on, because it's already in your portfolio and there's equity in it. If you've got experience, if you've done this sort of thing, similar projects before, or you're working your way up in the sort of the project ladder, all of these things go in your favour and open the door to more lenders. So it's not a case that you go to lender A and we go through and we tick half of their boxes and they say, well, in that case, it costs you this much. Most of the time, lender A has a series of boxes that we can tick or not. And if it's a not, then they may have 2 or 3 different products, but we'll probably go on to a lender B who has less boxes that we need to tick. So that's why we, as brokers, we do a lot of fact finding at the beginning, and I try not to approach lenders until I've really got that understanding for the customer of who they are, what they want, and where they're going. Take that time with the customer, get that really, really in-depth understanding, which is where our funded model comes in, and then go to the lender and say, right, this is what we've got, and you should be able to answer all the lender's questions at that point, so that you know that they're going to do the deal. They've got enough knowledge from that first phone call or first email with a deal summary that they will be able to do it. And if there's any glitches in there, if there's something that I want to push their lending criteria a little bit, I'll highlight that at the beginning. I won't hide it until to the end, because nobody wants to get 3/4 of the way through the deal, having put a lot of work in, for me to say, oh, I forgot to mention, this customer's just come out of prison. And then suddenly, oh, well, we don't lend to people who've just come out of prison. So the deal falls apart. It's much easier if you start at the very beginning saying, yeah, slightly dodgy past, will we still look at it? And they can say yes or no. And generally speaking, the answer to that is yes. You can find a home for things. The guy that came out of prison, I don't think I actually did find a home for him. But it does happen. He told me he'd been in Dubai, which I'm not sure if that's some sort of slang for prison.
Sorry, I can help that. Wow.
Yes, and it was fraud as well, which doesn't bode well when you're trying to raise money on property.
Well, and clearly he'd not learnt a lesson, because he was trying to raise finance under false pretenses that he'd been in Dubai and not in prison.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, still a fraudster.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Oh, Paul, thank you so much for sharing those examples with us, because, often, people like me don't actually know how brokers actually place deals. We just expect to ring you guys up and for you to say, yes, don't you worry, I can get you, a fantastic product, like 110% loan to value at, 0.1% per annum. And
I can give you the number of a really good broker who can do that if he's still in business.
and we don't often appreciate what goes into helping us just make our dreams come true. So thank you very much. And for people who are going to be listening to this on the podcast, you can contact Paul. Just go and his business is acon.finance. So https // acon.finance. And for people in the room, if you just click on the link that I've pinned above, you will be able to see Paul's website. You can also contact him on Clubhouse. He's Paul Thompson. send him a message, or you can email him. Paul, do you want to also kind of like, tell us some other ways to contact you so that people have all of those to hand?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest thing is probably through my link tree. So it's, how do you say that? It's linktr.ee. So that spells link tree slash paul.t. So that's pretty simple. And that'll lead you to our Facebook, which is finance.uk. It'll lead you to LinkedIn, which is, oh gosh, now I'm going to struggle. I think it's Paul_Acorn. Um, and, there's various other ways to contact me. But, I'm quite happy to give my email address out if that's okay, Patricia.
Oh yeah, definitely. Please do.
Yeah, so it's paul@acorn.finance. Very simple. No co.uks, no .coms, just acorn.finance. But yeah, we're here to try and answer questions. One thing I should add really is going back to that hotel case. We did a lot of work before we get paid, and brokers do that. So I think I'm probably speaking for most brokers that when we get paid, it's good, and that's why we do the job. But you want to see your customers successful, so you do spend time at the beginning helping them to put the deal together and saying, well, if you do, if we put it together in this way, so in that case, we need to get the right contractor, we need to get an architect on board to do control, that sort of thing, then we can fund it. If we don't do that, if we go to a cheap builder and we try to control it all ourselves because you've got no experience, we're going to come unstuck and we're not going to get the funding. So sometimes you do end up putting a lot of work in advance of being paid anything, and sometimes all that work comes to nothing because the customer then loses the property. It's a purchase, and they don't get that property. So I know that you're paying a fee, and you don't want to pay a fee, but you're paying for that experience. You're paying for the fact that we spend a lot of time in meetings with lenders. So my previous call was with a new lender. In an area that I didn't know a lot about, in funding startup companies in software and these SaaS, software as a service businesses, in e-commerce and all that sort of stuff. And it's a new line of funding. It's not something that's particularly mainstream yet, but I need to know about it because I've had clients that have looked for that in the past and it hasn't been available, and now it's coming available. I want to know about it. So you spend your time learning around your subject, around finance, in my point of view, the same as you guys are spending time listening to Patricia's podcast to learn more about property and how to get the most out of it. That time has to be paid for somehow because I'm not on the clock. I'm not getting £20 an hour from my boss. I'm only earning money when I'm talking to customers. So, yeah, that's why we have to charge a fee, as if I have to justify it. But sometimes I feel that I do.
No, never. Like you say, the customers who are going to go away because they don't like what you're doing are probably not the customers that you want in your business anyway. So that's all good. So there we have it. Paul, the only thing that's left for me to say is thank you very much for setting time aside to talk to me and, to talk to people who might need your services, because in maximizing property values, we need to be able to fund our deals. So you are really, really helping me by talking about this and by, letting people have an avenue to go to if they have a complex stroke impossible case, which may or may not result in funding. So thank you very, very, very much. And next week, my diary says that I'm talking to Sunil Popat. So, people, you know the drill. Every Wednesday, 12 noon. Well, usually every Wednesday at 12 noon. I am here with a lovely guest, and again, I'm looking forward to next week. But Paul, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Patricia. Really enjoyed our chat. It's been good.
Thank you. Me too. Take care. So for people
this
in
is
the room,
I was going to say this is probably it's probably the only episode that I won't listen back to.
Do you know what? I think you're just like me. I can't listen to my own voice. I never listen back on my podcasts ever. No. Okay. Well, you enjoy Funny Space.